Hello, hello, I'm Ghost. I'm your host, and today we're talking about childhood trauma, particularly things from my era, Gen Z. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, and I feel like a lot of it is kind of under-discussed nowadays. I mean, we always talk about this stupid creepypasta bullshit, but I think there's a lot more to the weird Gen Z spooky childhood trauma stuff, and I think it's all worth talking about. So let's talk about it, and let's have a little bit of fun. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it.
I walk to Burger King, then I walk back home from Burger King.
Happy Tree Friends is a pretty, quick one that comes to mind, simply because Happy Tree Friends was a big fucking deal back in the day. I sometimes wonder if kids are still finding that shit on the internet. I don't know, but I think that it's a fun little thing to come across. I feel like everyone from my generation has some memory with Happy Tree Friends, and I think that's really funny. Happy Tree Friends is, if you aren't already familiar, basically if Looney Tunes was intensely fucking violent, and it was well known. It was by, Mondo something or other. And basically, they're responsible for a bunch of different series, notably Dick Figures as well. And Happy Tree Friends is their real claim to fame, and the thing that really pushed them to become a name that was somewhat known in the cartoon world, particularly online. Not only is Happy Tree Friends remarkably impactful, considering that I believe without it, a lot of internet series that came later, for better or for worse, such as, like Hazbin Hotel, or Hell of a Boss, or Amazing Digital Circus, I feel like a lot of it wouldn't exist without the existence of Happy Tree Friends, which showed that there was a platform that people could make their own series on, even if early Happy Tree Friends were really just, 2-minute episodes. But it got big enough that eventually it was getting 20-minute long episodes, and for some reason you can find one of the series runs on Crunchyroll, which is super random and weird, but if you're gonna watch Happy Tree Friends, I'd probably just skip to that stuff and avoid the early stuff, considering that the early stuff, while influential, isn't particularly notable. Happy Tree Friends revels in really, really, really fucking brutal violence. I mean, you've been seeing some throughout this segment, but seriously, there is a lot of absolutely unhinged gore that you can see in the series. Now, of course, it isn't particularly realistic, because, it's cartoon characters, little animal people, so generally speaking, I don't think that older people are going to be terribly impacted by it, but for a child, yeah, this shit's pretty fucking crazy. And, like I said, this was a big thing back in the day, and a lot of people I know saw it when they were young. I did. Now, for me, it was less uncomfortable and more, gnarly, which says a lot about who I am and how I ended up doing this shit. But, I thought that Happy Tree Friends was something worth mentioning in this conversation because, weirdly enough, I don't see it talked about as much nowadays, or at least not in a setting in which it's really just talking about the influence of the series. So I think that Happy Tree Friends is worth mentioning in this conversation, but also worth checking out at least a little bit at some point in your life.
I walk to Burger King, then I walk back home from Burger King.
Now going in a much more mild direction, yet arguably having a significantly bigger impact, is Courage the Cowardly Dog. Courage the Cowardly Dog was a Nickelodeon show, which, because it was on Nickelodeon, it targeted children. However, it was one of those Nickelodeon shows which was just really aggressively bizarre and kind of reveled in being oddly uncomfortable. Now, of course, some very, very dark topics were discussed in the series, particularly, domestic abuse. But that's not really the childhood trauma part. The childhood trauma part, the kids aren't going to understand that stuff. What the kids can understand is, wow, this thing looks freaky, and it has a bunch of reverb on its voice. That's scary. The Give Me the Slab episode is obviously one of the most famous episodes of Courage the Cowardly Dog, and definitely one of the most commonly remembered for being just really bizarrely uncomfortable. But that was really all of Courage the Cowardly Dog. which is why it's made a big resurgence in popularity among alternative culture. You know, that Hot Topic group, they fucking eat up Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's fucking crazy. Like, seriously, just show them, like, a backpack with a Courage patch on it, and they will go berserk. They fucking start slobbering on the ground. It's wild. Courage the Cowardly Dog, though, really is a great show, and something that I did grow up with for a time, even though it wasn't necessarily my favorite show or anything. Revisiting it now, it really is a maturely crafted show, which has some really great ideas brought to the table, and it's significantly more creative and innovative than many of the other shows from that era. One of my personal favorite episodes is the Freaky Fred episode, in which that motherfucker just really wants to shave Courage. And, you know, he's just weird. It's really as simple as that. He's weird. He's uncanny. And because these kids haven't really experienced media like that, they end up getting a little bit perturbed by it. Personally, I think it's a great show for kids, teens, and adults alike, and it's definitely something that left an impact on my generation, as it was really freaky for a kid to see, especially back then when there was really nothing else like it that kids were being exposed to exactly. It gained enough traction that, you know, it really was actually, like, aired semi-regularly, but it still remained a little bit of a cult classic for a while, before ultimately exploding in popularity more recently, despite being over for quite a while. Courage the Cowardly Dog is definitely something worth checking out. It's a great show, and it's left an impact on my generation, and generations to come as well.
I walk to Burger King, then I walk back home from Burger King.
Next we'll be talking about the just shit ton of My Little Pony horror content. Now, My Little Pony has been popular for a very long time, but in like that weird early/mid-era like YouTube-y stuff, there was a lot of shit people were making, notably the Smile music video, in which Pinkie Pie just, like, ruthlessly murders a whole fuck ton of ponies, like fellow My Little Pony characters. I don't know jack shit about My Little Pony, nor was this really a personal experience for me, but it seems to have been an experience for a lot of other people, so I felt like it was worth bringing up. So, sorry to all the My Little Pony diehards out there, I can't really provide really good, info. You know, I know Rainbow Dash, but there's a lot of weird My Little Pony content out there. There was also that one game in which Pinkie Pie, like, turned her friends into cupcakes. Put that title on the screen and show a clip of it or whatever. I don't really have that much to say, because it's such a general topic, but, you know, still thought it was worth bringing up. There's a lot of My Little Pony horror content out there, and, you know what? I'm sure there still is a lot of My Little Pony horror content being made, so, hey, maybe this will carry over to all these new generations and the generations to come.
I walk to Burger King, then I walk back home from Burger King.
The next thing I'll be talking about is Adult Swim. Both the bumpers on Adult Swim, which you can find entire videos just talking about how freaky that shit is, but also just the transition from Cartoon Network to Adult Swim, because that shit was always weird. You know, you stay up a little late watching Cartoon Network in your living room, and all of a sudden it's like, Cartoon Network will be back at 6 a.m. And, you know, I remember when I was a kid, I always would, like, start scrolling through the shows that were up next on Cartoon Network, but when it was really Adult Swim, and I'd be like, what are these shows, Mom and Dad? But I always thought it was really oddly unnerving. Now, the transition wasn't particularly spooky or creepy or anything. It was weird. It was something that always bothered me and created an unexplainable spooky feeling, in the same way that people talk about, like, the SpongeBob closing credits, where it's like, we don't know why the fuck it freaks us out, but it was always just a little bit uncomfortable. That's exactly how I felt. And then, of course, in the chance that you accidentally walked in on one of those absolutely unhinged bumpers, or you found yourself watching an Adult Swim show late at night, getting lucky and getting to watch one or two, and you saw one of those absolutely insane bumpers, god damn, were some of those fucking crazy. It's just some weird shit. I always thought Adult Swim's simple existence was bizarre as a kid, because I was like, man, who's staying up so late? Who's staying up till 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m.? And I wanted to see what they were airing, what people were supposed to be watching at that time slot, because I was like, man, it's such a bizarre idea that anyone would be watching anything at that time. Of course, nowadays, I've watched all sorts of shit at that time, so you know. But at the time, it was always such like this weird, magical, mysterious feeling where you wanted to know what it was like and you wanted to know what these things were. It was always such an unusual little experience, and I feel like it's worth bringing up.
I walked to Burger King, then I walked back home from Burger King.
Salad Fingers is one of the many, many traumatizing Newgrounds animation series that I could really talk about, or just Newground animations in general. I believe I've spoken about Salad Fingers briefly in the past, and I love Salad Fingers, personally. I remember it used to keep me up at night when I was a little kid. The first time I watched it, I was kept up at night for a little while. Eventually, I had fallen asleep, but I remember looking around and I was imagining him being in my corner. It was such a bizarre feeling, especially considering that Salad Fingers himself isn't an inherently evil character, nor does he necessarily mean harm. He's just entirely in his own delusional world. Salad Fingers is another one that just revels in the absurd, and that's exactly why it reached so many children. There's nothing that seems so outwardly, viciously explicit or anything outside of him orgasming to fucking rusty spoons. But just the absolute absurdity of the series always crept into your mind. It's another thing where, you know, kids hadn't really experienced anything else like it. So in the chance that they stumble across Salad Fingers, well, it's an impactful experience. Revisiting the series today, I think Firth is a form of creative genius, and I think Salad Fingers is the pinnacle of his work, just because it's unusual, and its world is built in this confusing way, and it seems as though Firth simply goes with the flow and tells the story he wants to tell, and that's very respectable. Furthermore, just being able to watch the progression of the episodes in quality is very rewarding. Early Salad Fingers may be charming in a twisted old internet sense, but new Salad Fingers is genuinely impressive slabs of animated content. Particularly Glass Brother, which I'd argue to be some of the greatest internet horror I've ever even seen, especially given the context of the rest of the series. Firth is someone very interesting, and in reality I could talk about all sorts of stuff Firth has made. But Salad Fingers is something that came to mind quite quickly, as Salad Fingers is something that I think a lot of people have memories with, stumbling across late at night or at a time they shouldn't have, and being a little bit impacted by it.
I walked to Burger King, then I walked back home from Burger King.
Obey the Walrus might be something that was a little bit more my personal circle, but I still feel like there's gotta be a good handful of other people out there, so I feel the need to bring it up, because Obey the Walrus is such a bizarre video. It's of this sickly person just doing these odd things with unusual music playing in the background, which really enhances the absurdity of it. And of course, people created these weird narratives around it, like it was this weird cult video or whatever the fuck, or it was satanic and evil. And that stuff always creeps a kid out, especially when you're raised as, like, a Christian fucking, like, a Catholic or whatever. You know, hearing that, like, it's evil, it's satanic, it's bizarre, it's unusual. That stuff was always weird. Another thing is the fact that it wasn't animated. It was a real person, and it was just bizarrely cut together, edited, and created into this unusual horror experience, with the cryptic title of Obey the Walrus being placed on the upload. It was something that I think a lot of people watched and were genuinely bothered by, whether it be because they were aware of the story behind it and were like, this feels slightly immoral, or because they quite literally came across it at a young age and were very, very deeply bothered by the bizarre contents of the short video. There isn't really much to talk about it. I'm pretty sure you can find some full videos out there discussing the person that is showcased in the video, Sandy Crisp, but I do believe that it's something worth at least briefly mentioning in this conversation, even if it isn't one that there's particularly, like, a lot to talk about in this format. It's definitely something that I think that a good handful of people at least experienced when they were young, and so I thought that it was worth bringing up.
Look at the guy dance! Look at the guy dance! Dance! Yes, it's real footage. Look at him go! Yo, it's you! It's from a documentary about this guy's life. He has like a disease or something. Boop. Walrus.
I walk to Burger King, then I walk back home from Burger King.
Lastly, I'd like to talk about one more very, very short, bizarre video. Well, really, I could dedicate this to a lot of bizarre videos, because there's a lot of bizarre videos out there that I think a lot of kids came across, like, the robot singing Daisy, Daisy, that one. But the one that I'm going to be talking about briefly, just because I personally remember this one, I never actually was creeped out by it. I always thought it was very, very amusing. But I Eat Little Babies, which was a fucked up version of an ad for Little Baby's ice cream, in which they say, I eat Little Baby's ice cream, but someone, like, messed with the video and made it say, I eat little babies. It keeps me young, it keeps me warm, it keeps me smooth, whatever the fuck. That video was referenced all the time in my little circle when I was a young kid, because it was just so absolutely bizarre, but we always thought it was very, very amusing.
No, but for next time, it's I eat little baby's ice cream.
Yeah.
It keeps me young.
Which I know is probably not most people's reaction, but I just wanted to bring it up because it was just such an odd and random little fucking video. So, you know, there's that. But I guess I'll really quickly shout out a bunch of videos similar to that, such as the Daisy robot video, the 112 Dirtbag video, I Feel Fantastic, Who Wants to Gnaw on Human Bones, Henry Eats, Dining Room Where There Was Nothing. All those videos. I mean, there's a whole fuck ton of them out there. I mean, you can literally just, like I might as well release the iceberg at some point of internet horror, because I had a bunch of that shit on there. But there's a lot of really, really odd stuff from early internet where it's just so bizarre and random and creepy. And, you know, Obey the Walrus and I Eat Little Babies, of course, fall under that umbrella too. And they're these short little videos, but they became absolutely massive just because they were so odd. YouTube 666, which was partially a creepypasta, partially a bug in YouTube, and partially just a fucking spooky video. All sorts of stuff out there. Gen Z childhood trauma, and the childhood trauma from before and after it, is something that I think is fun to talk about because I am a Gen Zer, and so being able to feel a little bit nostalgic for these creepy little things from the times of a simpler internet is just something I find fun to talk about. So I hope that you guys enjoyed. I know that it's a topic that's been discussed many times, but I hope I brought up some stuff that you guys haven't heard brought up as much, because, you know, I believe I did. I think that there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about, though, in this conversation. I certainly didn't even cover a fraction of the amount of things that I could have. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you check out some of my other stuff. And I thank you for getting this far, and I wish you the best.